And if you want to go to Pacific Source and put in a claim, that's going to be administered by you and them, and I'm not going to get into it. But I'm not going to allow, so to speak, allow you coverage. And you're going to say that I'm not covering you on this mailing. There's a difference between the plan, the employer, and the carrier. It's the resources that are so critical in healthcare reform. And it just disappoints me. And myself, you know, Iris here working in a small business, I don't know how people know how to comply with things.
Well, no, because, I mean, a small employer, if they hear that information and they get scared, and they don't have the resource, you know, to really dig into testing and discrimination testing, they might just say, okay, well, I'll just cover everybody.
Well, yeah,
spend the money, you know.
Yeah, yeah.
Just out of fear of.
Right, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
I mean, how can this be right? I mean, for example, we have a nanny that works like 3 days a week for us at home. My wife works. I work so when she's not there. I mean, I have to pay like $280 to the state of Oregon a year for unemployment insurance. I fill out a bunch of forms, and I feel like I'm a reasonably educated guy. And while I can't fall into the recent Bond movies, that's my recent idea of how educated you are. If you can follow one of the Quantum of Solace or Casino Royale movies, you're very smart, because I can't. But if can you comply with state of Oregon employment laws? I mean, it's impossible. I do this stuff all day long. I got to sign up on some website, and I got to remit the money, and they want a form. They got to call me once a year and interview, and I say, she's my nanny. She's like 19 years old. She works down the street. I mean, I just pay her. I want to be compliant with the law, but how do I do it?
Yeah.
It's very difficult. And yeah, if they were with Xenium or somebody else, they'd have had somebody to call. But not all of us have that luxury. So, yes?
What's happened to the requirement that businesses provide a 1099?
Isn't that a fascinating one?
Any vendor that provides more than $600
We will not do anything until you solve tax cuts. That's what happened to it. President Obama in his press conference right after the elections, I was amazed that he said this out loud. But he said, for example, the 1099 provision seems to be causing consternation, and we'll consider it, overturning it, because it seems to be a huge issue. I thought to myself, first of all, why wouldn't the answer be, how much money are we trying to gain from this, and can we provide assistance or some other way? But that's what he said. What did Republicans follow up with? We will do nothing until you pass the tax cut.
So it's still in limbo.
It's still in the limbo, and it will be in the limbo.
So at this point, it's still a requirement.
It's still a requirement.
For 2010 or 2011?
11.
Okay. So it's been put off a year.
But, well, it's put off. It's really going to be 12 ultimately now, because it'll have that extension, but it's likely to come out. Okay. It really is. But it's there right now, and it's being held up. It's a great example of a version that they will act on nothing until tax cuts. Yes?
And when we first rolled out Medicaid years ago, and then we really didn't predict costs very well, and it kind of got blown out of proportion, they did the budget reconciliation, add one of the many acts.
Yeah.
And when they did that, they retroactively changed all of that, kicking a lot of people off the program because they guessed wrong, and none of those people were able to have legal recourse in courts because there just wasn't. And they said, hey, we guessed wrong, you planned, you're kicked off, deal with it.
Yeah.
What's the risk, you know, talking about the business owner who's trying to provide people who aren't acting, of them getting 4 years out and having to retroactively go back? Oregon's already done it as an individual state, retroactively taxing. How do you essentially plan for retroactive? And is there any way in the courts that you've ever seen when that happens to stand up like you could to a private company that can't legally be back as a contract?
Well, there are several parts to your question. First of all, the reconciliation process impacted some of why people were not able to have recourse. Because what reconciliation is, as was passed, is it's really a manner in which you deal with a budget and you pass a bill that impacts spending and has a sunset out of provisions. So what you're referring to is you have this Medicare bill, you reconcile the bill. It's really where reconciliation started, to be honest. We put in the provision, we have it go, and then certain people had thought they were there, couldn't get it, but the way it was a spending bill, so there's no real standing, so to speak, there to have it. In this bill, you're more likely to have recourse, because it's unlikely to get changed by reconciliation. It's likely to be legislatively changed, dropped in the bill. But to your point about actual recourse, I mean, what do I care about? Am I going to get penalized or something for having tried to do something in the next 2 years? The answer is no if you tried to cover what's in there, which would be issue 1099s. And that's the proper way to go. A good example of this in healthcare reform are these summaries, 60 days in advance. I would tell all of you as a lawyer that the bill says if you're going to make a change to a plan, you have to 60 days in advance tell people that you're making that change. If you ask me when do I think it's effective, I tell you in March of 2012. But it doesn't say that in the bill. It has no date at all. What happens when we make a bill like this? We draft a sort of general bill, and we throw in things like 1099. We throw in things like the 10% excise tax on indoor tanning. Things get dropped in. It's what we call earmarks, and what they're referring to as earmarks. Things get dropped in that get put into bills. They're not thought about, they're not rewritten, it's an enormous process. Who rewrites it? The author of the bill, the committee, etc. So you have uncertain dates. So kind of the third part of your question is really what do I, as I heard it, what do I do and how do I plan the future for these uncertainties?
Just the threat of another retroactive, hey, we really miss conservative. There was no room in their budget, I think they're right to the dollar.
Right.
So can the threat of it being retroactive, especially for business owners, is where I do a lot of my consulting.
Right.
On the sidelines, the reality of retroactively doing this, it's happened historically. So.
Well, it's happened historically. I mean, 66, 67, which you referred to
No,
was...
I mean the
you're talking
Medicare
tax.
reform.
No, I know. You're talking about the retroactive impact of funds from me. In the Medicare retroactive was, I thought I was in this group, I missed my ratios or et cetera, I wasn't included in it, I was off of the grid. Happened to a lot of children actually, Medicare was in that bill. That's a little different issue than I think what the business owners are facing, which is something going to get placed retroactively back on me as compliance or requirement. Luckily here, there's not a lot of funding requirements for business owners. I would worry about the Medicare tax, maybe the 0.9 increase, but that's about it. And healthcare reform is about properly understanding your documents, and it's probably about understanding are you self-insuring or insured funding too. That's where most of, I think, your consulting I would direct it. So, 9:15, so we got about 3 hours left. Just ends at noon. I'm here all day. Executive regulatory agencies. Okay, what does the executive do? The executive branch runs the Department of Labor, IRS. A lot of people don't understand that. So the head of the DOL right now is a Democratic appointed head, and it's really run by the Democratic administration. So the DOL, the EPA, the IRS, any regulatory HHS agency is going to come under the thumb of the president. So everything you see out of it is going to be liberal, broad, and interpreting healthcare reform. We've had a lot of interim final rules that have come out. One that came out yesterday. Why do we use the word interim final? Isn't that kind of an oxymoron? The concept of interim final is if I have, under administrative law, I have to put out a regulation. If it's final, I have a comment period and then some time before it becomes effective. If I put out what we call interim final regulations, what we used to call proposed regulations, but that really wasn't working out very well, I can put them out, have them actually effective today, and then pull them back if we don't like them or make changes. Why is this important? One of the strategies for healthcare reform overhaul by the Republicans right now is to do what we call run out the clock. Run out the clock means you flood the agencies with commentaries on any regulations they put in, and you force them to respond to each one of them as they have to do under law, and you make it so voluminous that they can't put out any regulations at all. This is what we do in today's politics, it's true. Republicans did it to Democrats did to Republicans when Bush was in office, and we're doing it right back today. That's what's happening. So you flood. The Chamber of Commerce, a hugely Republican institution, will tell any business owner here to go write a comment, I don't care what you write, and send it in so they have to respond. And by 2012, when the Republicans win the election, all the Republicans will say, yeehaw, we've taken back all the regulations that weren't in fact final. That's what you do. So what are the Democrats doing in response? They're putting out interim final regulations that are effective today to implement healthcare reform. It takes a lot of time, it is a lot of nonsense, it's a ridiculous process, but it is what's happening today. And that's how you have to operate as a business, is understand you're going to see interim final, you might see changes, we're going to rush these out because if we don't, we're in trouble. Because we'll get no guidance out of it all. And try to do as much as we can until 2012. If Obama wins in 2012, we've got about, I don't know, a year probably where we can put out regulations okay, until the next process of running out the clock goes to 2016. So, what have we had for interim final regulations? We've had very few, as you can tell. We've only had, I don't know, about 12. It's been quite dizzy. We had early retiree reinsurance on May 5th. We had a web portal on May 10th, dependent age 26, May 13th, grandfather June 17th, patient bill of rights June 22nd, pre-existing conditions June 28th, cost sharing July 14th, health plan appeals the 23rd, pre-existing conditions, amended grandfather rules, medical loss ratios yesterday. And we can expect more probably for the next week and a half. Everybody in the government goes on an absolute vacation from about December 16th through December 31st. That's the government's version of run out the clock, which is if I have not taken my accrued vacation by today, I lose it on 12/31, so I'm taking the rest of the year off. So it'll essentially shut down. We also have a lame duck Congress in session right now. Depending on how much they actually do will depend on whether we see regulations. You will see a fair amount, I think, in early 2011. They will address issues like essential benefits, preventive services, et cetera, which we'll talk about today. So this is what we have. I'm going to go through some of these kind of as they're important in a few minutes, but this is where your regulations and guidance exists on healthcare reform today. We also have FAQs. The government is putting out a lot of FAQs to kind of help you understand what are these. Now, these are very helpful. I recommend anyone who cares about healthcare reform beyond seeing me speak, and presumably you came here not just to see me, but healthcare reform. The HHS has got a great website that contains all of these FAQs. I think it's called Healthcare Reform Gov or something now. .gov. They put out 4 of these. There might have been a 5th, and I just missed it. There's also been some IRS guidance on cafeteria plan expenses, which is something for 2011 you need to care about. And then no more over-the-counter drugs. No W-2 requirement, and then that you at first had to put this at W-2 healthcare expenses. I ask this every time, and people still, I don't always think it's the right answer. What's the one moment that all of your employees understand what they pay for healthcare? It's on their paycheck, but they don't understand it that day. It's a good point.
When they quit their job.
Yes, COBRA. When they get their COBRA bill, it's on their paycheck and they see it, but they don't really get it until they get COBRA. And then they universally say that there's a mistake and you're trying to screw me. And it's not $800. And you say, no, it really was. We were paying 50% or 40% or whatever on your paycheck and you just didn't get it. But they get that first COBRA bill and it's just like, oh my God, this is health insurance. So we took that off the W-2. We were going to show everybody there. A lot of businesses today, and you may do this, do these fancy benefit statements, true compensation. They show you your salary. They show you the value of health insurance paid. They don't look at that. They look at the salary. They think it's not fair and they want to raise. That's why I doubt this Mercer survey saying 90% think healthcare is important. 90% think not having to pay for healthcare is important, I believe. And then there's a non-discrimination regs notice that came out, which essentially said we'll issue non-discrimination rules later. The FAQs are largely about a lot of insurance. The real interesting part of the FAQs that I would look at involves some of the grandfathering, one of which was now overturned in the regulations. But at first, one of the FAQs came out and said, if you change an insurer, but not the other insurers, that insurer retains grandfathering. So remember, grandfathering says if you change anything about your insurance at first, you lose grandfather. Then the FAQ came out and said, well, but if you have a Kaiser Regents policy and you just change Kaiser to Providence, your Regents policy remains grandfathered. Then they came out and said, wait a minute, if you change an insurer, it doesn't mean you lose grandfather. Now, they said that November 15th, which of course was well after most calendar year plans already changed their insurers and sent out non-grandfathering notices, or didn't change insurers because they were worried about grandfathering. So it wasn't entirely helpful, but what it is showing us is, A, we don't have a lot of understanding of the government about these rules, truthfully. They put it out, they put out what they were hoping, which was everybody will lose grandfathering and everybody will have healthcare reform and lifetime limits and preventive cost sharing, and we'll do the hardest extent of the law to remain grandfathered. Then we realized that self-insured plans can change administrators, and that's not really fair. We had people saying, insurers, and, I don't know if you experienced that, insurers saying, but if you change us, you'll lose your grandfathering, so I think you should keep us as your preferred provider, which then led a lot of consumers to be not really having fair in the marketplace. So, I mean, they're trying to react, that's the positive, but the uncertainty out there is really shown by this. It also shows very clearly that the government looks very differently in healthcare reform as to whether you're a self-funded plan or an insured plan.